Everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another installment of ConservAmerica's webinar series. I'm Jeff Kupfer, President of ConservAmerica. For those of you who are new to our organization, we are a nonprofit dedicated to developing and promoting market-based solutions to energy environmental conservation challenges. As an organization, we've been around for a few decades, but have recently reinvigorated ourselves to help drive policy debates towards more meaningful, impactful solutions. And the timing is certainly right, as there's no shortage of challenges that we face and issues to address. Towards that end, we're working on many fronts, including supporting the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus, which is a bicameral group of conservative members, as well as working on policy and holding these information webinars. Today, we're excited to discuss the Department of Energy's loan program. Just by way of background, the loan program was created in the 2005 Energy Policy Act, took a couple of years to be implemented. The program then provided a flurry of guarantees and loans from 2009 to 2011, then went somewhat into a deep freeze, closing loans on only one project, the Vogtle nuclear plant, in the last decade. But now the program is being looked to as a key component, if not the centerpiece, of the Biden administration's efforts to transform the energy sector. The office has over $40 billion in loan authority, which even by Washington standards is a lot of money. We're thrilled to be joined today by the director of the office, Jigar Shah, and by Rob Hanson, who's the CEO of Monolith, which is the first and thus far the only company to receive a conditional loan guarantee from the administration. Jigar, as many of you know, has a long history in the private sector. Back in 2003, he founded SunEdison, which pioneered solar financing. He then went on to co-found Generate Capital, which helped accelerate decarbonization solutions by using low-cost infrastructure financing. And then he couldn't pass up the opportunity to join DOE. Actually went back to see how long he's been at DOE, and it turned out that the press release that announced him was exactly 1 year ago, March 3rd, 2021. So happy first anniversary, Jigar. Glad that you're joining us.
Thank you.
I don't know if you actually knew that it's been exactly a year, but probably feels like a little bit longer.
My LinkedIn reminded me.
Okay, great. Rob co-founded Monolith a decade ago after working as the global head of product management for Areva solar division of the world's largest nuclear company. And rather than me trying to summarize exactly what the company does, I'm going to let Rob do that in a few minutes. Okay, enough intro. Before we get into the discussion, I also want to encourage our viewers to send us questions. We'll get to as many of them as we can, many of those questions as we can. Jigar, I want to turn to you first. So you've now been head of the office for a year. Can you take a few minutes to summarize the functions of the office and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me and the office here. Look, I think that the bottom line here is that the Loan Programs Office, in the way that Senator Domenici envisioned it, plays an essential role in helping companies that really do have proven technologies move across the bridge to bankability, from first of a kind deployment to engineering excellence to learning curve, cost reductions, and all the way to full Wall Street acceptance. And, you know, it's a shame that the office was dormant for the last 10 years, but I think that in doing the restart of the office, I think there was a couple of things that we had to do. One was see whether there was still demand for what we had to offer, right? And really see whether private sector CEOs were interested in bothering, right? Because even if what we have to offer is interesting and valuable to them, they may not, invest the 500 hours worth of staff time it takes to do it. And, today we've got over 300 companies that are actively engaged with the office, 77 of which have actually filled out the application and formally submitted them into the pipeline, requesting $70 billion worth of debt proceeds. And now we've got the next challenge, which is, are we efficiently processing the loans, right? And so do they have to wait 12 to 16 months to get through the office, or can they do them in 6 to 8 months? And I'd say that clearly the Monolith experience was more like the 12 to 16-month experience. But I think that for the new applicants coming through, I think the ones that we'll be announcing here in the not so distant future will be more like 5 to 6 months to get through the process. And then we've got some that are still going to take 12 months because they don't have all the answers that for the questions that we asked. But I think that the confidence level, not only from the staff who, frankly, were not as confident when we first came in, but also from the broader political folks around the table is quite high. And the last thing I would say is even by sector, you can imagine the renewable energy and efficient energy applicants trusted us first. I mean, those are folks that I've known for many years. But we've also gotten in roughly $8 billion worth of nuclear applications. So those took longer to gain trust with. And we've now got $5 billion worth of fossil applications that have come in, and another $10 billion that we're actively working with to come in. And so I think we're even getting a lot of traction with the fossil industry, which I think to date has been more distrustful as to whether they're going to be treated fairly in the office. And I think we've been able to win them over. And so, every single one of these requires a personal relationship, a personal touch, a personal phone call to really get that trust going. But we've, been willing to invest the time and effort to do that.
Jigar, can you sort of, you mentioned the word trust a few times. Can you unpack that a little bit for us in terms of why that is so important? And sort of related to that, I've heard you refer to the office now as kind of loan program office 2.0, maybe as opposed to what it used to be. So what's different now, other than just maybe, hey, let's try and reinvigorate it? But what does that mean as kind of a practical matter in terms of how the office is functioning and how it interacts with potential borrowers?
Yes, I won't go through all the administrative changes that we've made, but we've streamlined the process. So we've gotten rid of half of the requirements in the Part 1 application so that it's easier to interact with the office. And so we've done a lot of the administrative changes to make us less bureaucratic and a little easier to access. And so a lot closer to what a commercial bank application would look like. So today, I think, interacting with us is not easy, but it's not easy to work with a commercial bank at a $530 million average loan size either. So it's sort of similar to the commercial bank experience. But I would say that the broader thing that we've really tried to do here on the trust side is, we want to make sure that everyone feels like the process is transparent and clear, right? I think that for a lot of people, not knowing, frankly, what the office is about, given that we've been dormant for 10 years, they believe the process is political, right? That, that we pick winners and losers based on who is in favor with the administration, and that's not true. We actually aggressively process every application that we receive as they come in and, as they meet all the requirements. But you can imagine that, people want to see that in practice, not just hear the words that are, coming out of my mouth. And so I think that is important, and it's important to recognize that we have to earn people's trust and not just expect it because we put out a interesting press release. I think the other notion here is that, we had a lot of changes to the Energy Act of 2020. And so in LPO 1.0, we were faced with a debt crisis in this country. And so a lot of the projects that LPO supported were projects that, in hindsight, were actually ones that were pretty low risk, right? 20-year power purchase agreements with a utility company, et cetera. Today, we have to do things that really leverage the 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts that are on the DOE platform to really bring our best thinking to the table on how to manage risk. And, Monolith is a prime example of that, where, I think before I came into office, Monolith was being asked by our office to go out and get a hedge from Wall Street. And Wall Street was saying, well, we want 25% of the take. We want 25% of all the revenues predicted in order to give you that hedge. And I was saying, that doesn't make any sense. I'd rather that 25% go into an escrow account to support our debt and eventually be released to the company than to be taken by Wall Street, right? And so figuring out how we logically use these new tools that were given to us under the 2020 Energy Act to be able to do merchant deals, to be able to figure out how to support people not only in electricity, where 20-year PPAs are common, but also in transportation fuels, in carbon black, in hydrogen, and other places where a long-term offtake agreement is not that easy to come by, but it's essential if we're going to decarbonize the economy by 2050. And so LPO 2.0 is also around changing the way that we think about risk and not taking more risk, right? So I think I can argue that we're taking the same amount of risk that we did in the past, but we're actually structuring deals in a more open-minded way.
Okay, and I'd note that the 2020 Energy Policy Act was actually a bipartisan bill that was put in place even before the administration took office, and we'll circle back later in the discussion about the bipartisan nature of the Loan Program Office and how and sort of support on the Hill and everything else. But before we do that, just because you've mentioned Monolith as well and offtake agreements and everything else, I think it'd be useful for everyone to get a sense of what Monolith is all about. Let me turn it over to Rob. And Rob, as we've discussed, why don't you take us through what the company actually does and produces, and then we'll get into a discussion about your interaction with the office.
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks, Jigar, for the intro. I'm going to share a couple slides, if that's okay. So we'll do the live test here.
It worked.
It worked.
You're good.
All right. So what Monolith does is we take two key energy vectors, one being natural gas, the other being clean electricity. And we use that clean electricity to heat natural gas up in a process called methane pyrolysis. And it's a process that we've commercialized for the first time in history. Natural gas, or methane, has this really great thermodynamic property. It's kind of like if you heat water up to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. If you heat methane up to much higher temperatures, 1500 degrees Celsius, it splits into its two components, hydrogen and solid carbon. And then when you cool it back down, it doesn't back react into methane. It stays as hydrogen and solid carbon. And what's really important about this is, number one, you've just created hydrogen without emitting any CO2 to the atmosphere because the carbon is in this solid form. Then what Monolith has done is, it's not just any old carbon. This isn't carbon that we're going to bury in the ground and sequester. Instead, we found a way to get this carbon to come out as this product called carbon black. It's something that probably most people have not heard of, but every single person touches every day of their life. Carbon black is a top 50 material in the world, and it finds its way into everything from tires, where it makes up a third of every tire on the planet, to the black keys in your keyboard, to mascara and makeup. And what's great about taking the carbon out of natural gas, not only as a solid, but as carbon black, is you've just created a bunch of economic value, which makes the whole economics of the process strong. It also bolsters your environmental position, because the current way that we make carbon black is extremely dirty, not just from CO2. It's got 2.3 tons of CO2 per ton of carbon black produced, which is a big deal, but it also produces a lot of sulfur emissions, NOx emissions, particulate emissions, which hurts the communities where these plants are. We have 15 carbon black plants in the US right now, all using the old technology, emitting a lot of emissions. So that's our technology. And then, like Jigar's, oh, go ahead, Jigar.
And every one of those plants is under a consent decree with the Department of Justice and EPA for local justice pollutions.
Yep. That's the existing 15 carbon black plants in the country. And by the way, their average age is 65 years old. So it's time to start bringing new technology into this space. And so that's what we've done. So to Jigar's point of kind of proven technology, over the past 10 years, we've scaled this technology from a lab in France to a demonstration project in California on the San Francisco Bay to our first commercial unit in Hallam, Nebraska, which is about 20 miles south of Lincoln, Nebraska. And this isn't an artist rendering. This is an actual picture of the plant. It's built, it's real, it's running, it's producing carbon black and hydrogen. What this plant is one unit. And what we're now proposing to do, and where the conditional loan guarantee is coming in, is we're planning to build 12 additional of those units. So identical to the one that's built, put 12 of them next to each other and scale up the production by 12-fold. And then what we're going to do with all of the carbon black is it goes into silos, and we're on the Union Pacific rail line. So we'll ship that carbon black to the various customers around this country. And then the hydrogen we're taking to what is shown in the front, which is an ammonia plant. And so on site, the hydrogen is converted into ammonia, which is the mother of all fertilizers. And at some point, I think it'd be great for us to talk a little bit about how essential ammonia is for the food production of this country, and also how we're still a large net importer of ammonia, and it just hit its highest price in history. But that's what Monolith does.
One of the things, Rob, that I would add to your presentation here is that, given the conflict in Ukraine, Russia is currently the largest exporter of carbon black. With this technology, if it's successful in its scale up by 2024, the US could become the largest net exporter of carbon black in the world using our homegrown natural gas. And the ammonia that they're producing is basically offsetting ammonia that's coming from Ukraine today via ship into Tampa, which via pipeline to Louisiana and then pipeline up to Nebraska using Russian gas. And so when you think about what this company is doing, is they're taking two very hard to decarbonize sectors, carbon black and ammonia, and using American innovation to decarbonize these sectors and give us better national security.
Yeah, it is wild. I can look out my window here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I can see the cornfields, which are very shortly going to have ammonia applied to every single acre so that you can get the yield that you need. And the marginal ton of ammonia is produced in Russia, piped 2,000 kilometers all the way through Ukraine to Odessa, put on a ship, shipped, and then piped or trucked up to that farmer's field. And with the resources we have in this country of natural gas and clean electricity, why we don't make that here, it's just beyond belief. And so we're super excited, not just for the clean side, which is, obviously where our passion is, but also for the security of supply of essential materials like carbon black and essential products like ammonia.
Rob, what is the electricity source that you currently use at the plant, and how may that evolve over time?
Yeah, so Nebraska is a fascinating state for many reasons, but it is particularly on the electricity side. It is the only state in the country that is 100% public power. So it's set up in public power districts. They're governed by publicly elected boards, and they don't have a profit motive. And so that does result in pretty low cost electricity. The mix is right now a mixture of a great nuclear asset, which is 30 to 40% of the grid. And that's Cooper Nuclear Station, which I think the country keeping the existing nuclear fleet running and powering is critical. And then it still has some coal. It has a little bit of natural gas, and then it's starting to get more and more wind. So that's kind of the current mix. From a long-term perspective, Nebraska is probably top 2 in the country for renewable resource. It's number 2 or so for wind and in the middle of the pack for solar. And so when you combine those two, you have incredible resource, and you've got a lot of projects. We've committed as a company to doing 100% clean electricity. And so how we do that right now is through a mix of the clean aspects of the grid, nuclear and some wind, as well as purchase of voluntary renewable energy certificates. But we are working with the state utility, Nebraska Public Power District, to build out additional renewable projects and perhaps do something really innovative on the nuclear side as well.
Okay, thanks. Rob, so your background, you're a private sector guy. You've been with Monolith for a decade. You built it with equity over that time. And then presumably at some point you and others in the company decided, let's put in an application to the loan program. So can you talk a little bit about what your view was of kind of government interaction, government relationship, subsidies, however you want to describe it, and sort of early on, and how that changed presumably at some point when you decided to apply for a loan, a conditional loan guarantee?
Yeah, so I mean, I did watch the LPO 1.0. I was in in climate tech, just coming out of school in 2006. And I did see the successes it had. I mean, I saw it launch Tesla, right? And that's a big deal. And so I always had respect for the program, but realized it had kind of gone dormant. The other thing I'd say is that when we founded this company, we started with a list of, let's say, values that we wanted to found the company on. And one of those was our economics could not be based on government incentive. And so what I like about the LPO is this isn't a grant. This isn't, here's some cash to do it. It's a loan. I mean, and we take that very seriously because I did the math. That works out to $7.25 for every US taxpayer. And so we're going to pay that back. And that's not only important from like a moral perspective, it's also important because a loan which we pay back and build a project that has solid economics around means by definition it's repeatable. And I think that's what got us really excited about LPO is it bridges you to a repeatable business model, which will allow us to build many projects later, not from LPO loans, but from, like Jigar was saying, that enormous wall of infrastructure dollars that wants to invest in companies like this, but isn't really capable of doing the deep technical and market diligence and figuring out how to actually underwrite the first project. But once that first project's up and running, I mean, the money floods in. So that's why we like it. That's the reason of why we were so excited. How it's been, I mean, it's Jigar, you sometimes say you've got 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts. There was a time where I think I talked to all of them. So I think us being first, the microscope was a little bit more powerful to make sure that there was, no issues with any of the risk profiles of our company. But I mean, incredibly talented group of folks at the DOE when you think of it in its totality and everything that it does in this country. And so as a technical person, that was actually like invigorating, right? You don't want shoddy due diligence that doesn't really get to the risks of the business. And the DOE was not at all that. So yes, it was long and it's sometimes painful, but in hindsight, it's like, that's what you want as a company, is to actually have a thorough evaluation of the risks of your business.
Rob, so you applied in 2019, which was obviously in the previous administration, and then carried over, and Jigar and the Biden administration are the ones who actually issued the conditional guarantee. So can you describe kind of what happened during the old administration and how maybe that compares to what's going on now in terms of the different parts of the loan, and just kind of how the interaction was?
Yep. So there's kind of three parts to the process: part one, part two, part three. And part three is kind of this deep technical diligence as well as market diligence. We did part one and two under the previous administration, and part three under Jigar's leadership. I mean, I think on the positive side, we had continuity. A lot of the, let's say, working level folks on the deal have remained. And I think that's exciting, right? It's like not something that we talk a lot about in this country. We like to talk more about the divisions, but I think there was like a seamlessness of going through the administrations as related to actually the work being done in the file. Now, what happened when Jigar came in, and I think the Biden administration, is it just like supercharged. It went from maybe we'll get this loan sometime to, okay, they're going to figure out whether they do this loan or not in the next 3-6 months. And so it just ramped up dramatically in a positive way, right? Because that's our objective, is not to just languish in the process for quarter after quarter after quarter, but actually get to a decision. And we were like, it's okay if the decision's no, because we'll go figure it out some other way. But we think this is the right way from a cost of capital and from, like I said, that bridging aspect of a repeatable business model. And so what was great is the pace, and it wasn't by taking shortcuts. It was just by putting more resource and really digging into the file.
Okay. Jigar, can you explain for everyone where the loan program kind of fits into all the various programs that DOE runs? I mean, presumably there's places in DOE that are trying to work on brand new technology, moonshot type work,
Yeah.
ARPA-E, others. Then you have, then you sort of go through the full spectrum. So can you explain where LPO fits in, and just to sort of foreshadow where I'm going with this? I think a lot of people wonder, should the government be in the business of providing these sorts of loans? Is kind of what's the overall proper role of government in this space? So if you could explain where LPO fits in and kind of why it makes sense, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think that when you think about the traditional role of DOE and the traditional role of technology commercialization, DOE has long provided demonstration grants to companies, and they're very used to getting these demonstration grants, right? To practice, carbon sequestration and storage, or practice some hydrogen projects or some other things. And that's great. But what DOE has struggled with is getting those demonstration projects to then lead to a rollout of the technology. What you find is time and time again, mainly Fortune 500 companies, I think, that get these grants, test out some sort of CCS technology or hydrogen technology or CO2 pipeline technology or whatever it is. And then it just sort of sits there saying, well, we wrote a report. It looks great. It worked. And you don't see a big rollout. And when you talk to these companies, I'm actually talking to many of them during Sarah Week, next week in Houston. What they'll say to me is they'll say, look, Jigar, the biggest problem that we have is the rate of return on these projects is somewhere in that 12 to 13% unlevered range, right? And as an oil major or as a steel company or a cement company or whatever it is that, whoever I'm talking to, 12 to 14% just doesn't move the needle. And we're actually not very good at using debt as an industry, right? The steel industry, the cement industry, the oil and gas industry. And so we like to use 100% equity when we fund our deals. We just do it off balance sheet. And yeah, we've underperformed the market for the last 12 years, but it's what we know. And but now that you're providing debt from the Loan Programs Office, we're able to go to our board and say, look, after we get this kind of debt from the Loan Programs Office, which they can't get from any commercial debt provider, precisely because of this bridge to bankability that Rob was talking about. The weighted average cost of capital allows us to make pretty solid double-digit equity returns on our equity. And so it makes us more confident to do a rollout of direct air capture or carbon sequestration and storage or hydrogen or all these projects where we've been demonstrating the technology for over 12 years for the industry. And, we're just getting them over the hump. And, some of the folks, when I talked to them, when I first came into office, said, oh, Jigar, we're never going to work with the government. Like, we're just never going to do it. And then, they made a bunch of promises at COP about how important it was for their business to transition and do these things. And then they went to their bankers and said, hey, we made these big promises at COP. Like, we want to fulfill these promises. Can you help us? And the bankers said, probably not. If you want to just take money out with a corporate guarantee, you can use it for whatever you want. But if you want a project finance deal, we're probably not going to help you. And, so then they've turned around come March and said, actually, the Loan Programs Office is exactly what we need to fill this void. And, we've gone from close to zero to $5 billion of loan applications in. We've got another $10 billion of loan applications that are actively being prepared, that we're looking at first drafts. And I think I've got another $20 billion after that, where we're in pre-consultation from the fossil industry to use the money. And so I think when you think about the essential role this plays, and then in nuclear, it's obvious, right? There are very huge, plans that we have to decarbonize our country using nuclear power. Every utility company that's made commitments by 2050 believes that they have to convert the coal plants that they're shutting down by the end of the decade to nuclear, that the grid was built around those sites. And they got to figure out how to bring in high capacity factor resources to make that work. And, they're not going to do it without the capital from the Loan Programs Office. I mean, there aren't a lot of commercial debt providers who want to play that role. And so look, I think that the essential role has been there ever since Senator Domenici came up with it in 2005. And, we were unfortunately not, active the last 10 years, but we are now.
And when you talk about the lack of commercial debt financing, I think a lot of people who maybe aren't involved in sort of the day-to-day to this just sort of look at it and they say, look, there's a lot of big name companies that we're talking about here that have invested in some of these projects. They listen to Rob talk about how successful his pilot project is and sort of the markets and the high prices that are out there right now for it. And I guess that there's some skepticism about, can they really not find that commercial financing at all? So how would you kind of answer that? And Rob, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well after Jigar goes.
Yeah, and that's what I'd say is, I've been in this sector for 25 years, right? When I started SunEdison, my first investors were Goldman Sachs and Hudson Bank, which is now TD Bank. And, Goldman charged me 17% interest and, Hudson was at 8% for a 20-year PPA with Whole Foods and Staples. So, that's sort of where the market clears on first of a kind deployment, even if it's solar technology that dates back to 1954 and was used on satellites for years. So, that is how the market performs. And I think when you look at the markets today, there's plenty of debt, right? There's a lot of people with money, but they want to chase solar and wind projects that are fully mature. If they want to do something with Monolith or other players, they got to spend 500 hours writing technical white papers and educating their investment committee and doing all that work. And if they can meet their numbers by just doing another solar project with 3 basis points lower cost of capital, that's an easier pathway than figuring out how to do a first of a kind plant, right? Even if you could potentially make the commitment, right? You don't need to do it to make your bonus, right? So why do it? So you've got a bunch of money right now at 3% cost of capital, right? They're chasing solar and wind deals. And actually I've seen them clear at 2.5%. And then you've got a bunch of folks in the specialty debt category that are basically some form of venture debt. They might offer you 6% interest debt, but then they want 12% of your company in warrants to do it. Or they, just charge you 15% interest for the debt, right? So there's this huge gulf in the middle of folks who are willing to treat you fairly and really look at your technology on the merits and give you a transparent process by which you can go through it, right? And not try to nickel and dime you because they're like, well, we don't think you have an alternative, so we're going to charge you higher because, they're capitalists. I don't fault them for it. But it doesn't make for a smooth process for companies like Monolith to actually get to providing these national security benefits that our country, can take advantage of.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I might add that there's a technology component to this, right? Like we need new technologies if we're going to make the energy transition. And there's going to be many of those technologies that are, for lack of better word, like BS. They're not going to work. And someone has to figure out at scale, right, at billion-dollar scale, which ones are real and which ones aren't. And I would say the traditional commercial debt providers just don't have a willingness or ability to do that today. The DOE does. And it's because of 10,000 engineers, scientists, and experts who have devoted their life to understanding energy and the technology, whether it's nuclear or geothermal or hydrogen or fossil or solar. They can actually assess the risk. And I think that's, well, it's not picking winners and losers. It's putting companies through rigorous due diligence, doing that 500,000 hours of work, writing the technical white papers to actually underwrite the risk in the technology of these projects and its technology and markets and how those all link together, execution, construction, et cetera, et cetera. Once that's done, once you can just say, hey, I'm building the third one, I can point to the other two in their operating history and their P&Ls and all that, then that's something that the commercial debt markets seem to really enjoy and will be willing to take quite low returns, as it has proven out in wind and solar, to do the nth project. But the first one and that evaluation of that kind of full cycle underwriting risk, the DOE is really well positioned to do it because of just who they are and what they do every day.
And you mentioned winners and losers, and there's always this back and forth about, is the government or should the government be in a position of picking winners or losers? Some people say, well, as long as you pick the winners, it's okay. But I think history has shown that the government doesn't always pick the right ones if that's where we're going. So how do you Jigar first, and Rob, if you want to chime in, how do you respond to that sort of, I guess, implied criticism that a program like the loan program, I mean, it's not going to give guarantees across the board to anyone who applies. There are going to be some decisions made, and how does that fit into this winners versus losers dynamic?
Yeah, I'll give you two answers to that question. And Rob obviously set the table very well there around our process, right? I mean, it's going to be rigorous. Everybody has to go through a rigorous process. So of the 77 applicants that are active today in the office, I would say probably only a third of them are fully prepared to go through our office in that rigorous assessment. The other 2/3 probably will get there eventually, but they're not ready now. And I can tell, like, in terms of how long it takes them to get me the answers I need and all that stuff, right? And so I think that's a threshold issue, and I think that we really are dispassionate about how we adjudicate loans, right? I mean, you either qualify for the office or you don't. And so in terms of answering the winners versus losers, I think there's two pieces to this. One is, what's our tolerance for risk, right? And what is our political flexibility around losing money, right? And I think when you think about the portfolio that we have today, we've had roughly a 3% loss rate, which I think if you think about the kind of risks that we took, most of the projects were rated, below investment grade credit, single B to double B credits. Some of them are triple C plus credits. Today, our entire portfolio is now being evaluated by the credit rating agencies as investment grade. So we did a really good job of managing risk and picking the projects through our technical process that deserved to get capital. So I think that part's great, but some would say that I think we didn't take enough risk, right? In order to really help the innovators that are out there, we have to be able to, as the secretary says, take a lot of swings at bat. And that means you have some misses, right? That's how we actually stay on the leading edge to make sure that we're helping the American innovators who really deserve assistance. The second way to think about winners and losers is putting your thumb on the scale and taking the stories that best fit the administration's goals and preferring those projects over ones that don't. Clearly, I think we haven't done that, right? I mean, Monolith, I think Rob and his team are fantastic, but you can imagine the administration's first choice may not have been a company that had feedstock that was natural gas, right? That's taking, methane and converting it into carbon black and hydrogen, right? I mean, and so when you think about the way in which, and you'll see that from the next few conditional commitments we're serving customers as they're ready to be served. We are not selecting applications that best meet some sort of storyline for the administration. We think that if you qualify for the office and you're truly innovative and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is what our statutory mandate is, then you should be treated fairly and be accelerated at the fastest pace that your company can handle the diligence that we have to do. And I think that is something that you're not going to believe me until I prove it to you, right? Until I've got 20 of these folks through the conditional commitment process, and you have a data set by which to evaluate whether I was being truthful with that statement or not. But that is the goal of the office, is to really be a dispassionate, provider of debt, where, if you meet the statutory requirements and you qualify for the office, then we're going to prioritize you as soon as you're ready to be, go through that diligence process.
Jigar, feel free to make any announcements of any conditional loan guarantees now if you want, but if not, I mean, do you have a target of how many you're trying to hit by a particular time? Or Yeah, how do you
Yeah.
think about it from that standpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say that, given my career, I don't take shortcuts, right? It's just not my DNA. And so whether it was building Sun Edison or building Generate Capital or now reinvigorating the Loan Programs Office, there are lots of things that we could do where we could actually get by something with a half an hour solution. And I insist that our team take 20 hours to actually fix the underlying foundational problem, get a legal opinion paper written, go through the Office of General Counsel, get it cleared by OMB, do all the things we have to do to actually really strengthen the foundation of this program. And that has taken longer than I have wanted it to take. But I think it's the right thing to do for future borrowers. I don't want this office to be held up by discretionary decisions by the political leader in office, but instead, I want this office to really have a strong foundation. And that's taken longer than I wanted. That being said, I think that a third of the 77 applicants are fully prepared to get through the office in 6 to 8 months. And so we expect that third will get through. Now, some of them will prove me wrong and take a little longer to answer the questions that we ask them, and end up taking 12 months to get through the office. But we're working hard to get those folks through the office as fast as they're ready to get through the office. And so that's how many, folks I think will get through over here over the next 12 months.
Okay, great, thanks. And how do you think about risk? I mean, you mentioned it, the 3% number that you mentioned before, an investment grade, and the comment about some people think you should be taking more risk, some less. As we all know, the Solyndra example from a dozen years ago is still something that is a talking point for many who are concerned about government's role in the program. So what are your measures of success and kind of risk tolerance? And do you think there's consensus among you and others in the leadership about where you should dial that particular level?
Yeah, look, I think that this office had 12 full-time staff at the time at which Solyndra was approved. Today, we're at 170 full-time staff with an entire risk management group, portfolio management group, and others. And so, I'm not going to say that Solyndra was a mistake, but I will say that mistakes were made. And every single time we make one, we learn from that mistake and we improve our processes to make sure that we don't make, any mistakes that are truly blind spots that we could have avoided, right? But we should be on the leading edge here, and we should be helping folks who, I don't think we should be taking fundamental technology risks. So I don't think we should be taking binary risk where we're like, well, it could work or it could not work. We're not quite sure, but we think it might work. We don't take those risks, right? So the risks we're taking with Monolith, which is similar to risks that we're taking with other potential applicants, is operating risk, right? Monolith has made promises to us that they are going to fix the operations issues that has plagued the scale up of this technology for 20 years, right? And we have audited their operators and believe that they have every ability to make good on those promises. Now, they may not, right? Like after 3 years of scaling up, it could be that instead of getting to 85% uptime, they end up at 65% uptime. And that doesn't mean the underlying technology evaluation was wrong. It might just mean that it's a lot harder to operate these plants than everyone thought there would be. And that could lead to losses in the loan portfolio. But those are the kinds of risks that we should be taking as a country, which means that we're betting on the innovators and change makers in our country. And that's great. I mean, if we make mistakes because we bet on Americans, we bet on the power of innovation and entrepreneurship, like I'm happy to make those mistakes all day.
So is your measure of success for the program? Well, let me just ask you, how would you then measure success? Presumably it's not making sure that no that no business that you've given a conditional loan to or a loan guarantee to stays afloat. I mean, because you've acknowledged that some of the risk may not pan out. So how do you measure things, and what should we all look back on in a couple of years and say, hey, that worked or it didn't work as a program? And Rob, I'd be interested in your thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Look, I'd say that, obviously you can't answer that question without hindsight, but I would say to you that I have every confidence that our risk management techniques will lead to a successful portfolio. I have managed loan portfolios, investment portfolios my whole career. And the risk management that we do here is on par with every other institution I've been a part of. So I do not believe we have a problem in that area. I think that when you think about the way in which we evaluated the Monolith loan, we didn't get to 80%, advance rate, which is what we can do from a statutory perspective. We're actually closer to sort of 55% advance rate on the loan. That is what we do for all the applications. Some of them are going to get to 65, some will get to 55, some will get to 50. So I think from a risk management perspective, we will be great across the entire portfolio. We have great risk management here at the loan programs office today. But I think in terms of what I'm solving for is trust, right? I want to make sure that every single entrepreneur who has a great idea, who has convinced equity to give them $100 million equity check in their C round and D round, who now have a $400 million project or a $2 billion project to get done, thinks of us as a partner. I want them to know that they're going to be treated fairly here and not to find some excuse not to work with our office. We're here to serve the American people. We're here to serve American entrepreneurs. And it pains me to think that there are people who qualify for our office who, for whatever reason, may not contact us and may not use us. And that is a failing of our office. And after this period of time that I'm serving is over, we are going to solve that problem. We are going to make sure that we gain their trust, not only, red and blue, but also, folks who just basically don't believe in that their success is buoyed by involvement by the government, that they think somehow their success is tainted by the government's involvement, right? I think as Rob suggested, we're a loan program, right? And we're tough on our applicants. So there's no free pass here. And I do think that part of the reason why people should use our office is that every Wall Street bank I've talked to has said to me that our adjudication process is so good that they would be honored to look at the second project after it gets out of our office for the first project, right? And that brings me a great deal of pride, right? That our team members are viewed that way so positively by major commercial institutions.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that the risk analysis at the DOE is up there. I mean, and we've spent 10 years, right? Starting with kind of more venture type money through private equity and now talking in asset level financing. I think an interesting broader perspective on risk as well is that, Jigar, you did a good job. It's, the risk in Monolith is we build the plant, we scale up, we work on all of our reliability. Instead of landing at 85% capacity factor, we land at 70% capacity factor. And so some people say, well, that's not a risk worth taking, right? We should just not take those risks. We should just keep doing what we do. The problem with that is that we're taking risk doing what we just do, right? And it's yes, obviously the long-term climate risks, but also, like we started, the near-term supply chain risks. So sitting here just saying we're going to rely on a global supply chain for, in this case, ammonia, which is a third of the cost of production of corn, like the probably most important input to growing the corn in this country, and carbon black, which is critical to the auto sector. Like there's tons of risk inherent in just saying, don't do anything, just stay with the status quo. And I think sometimes people miss that and they think that the conventional path is zero risk when in fact it's a lot of risk. And so the lowest risk path, in my opinion, is actually doing the Monolith project, taking the risk of we land at 70, not 85% capacity factor and the mitigations that need to go in that scenario, as opposed to saying, don't do it. We don't want to take those types of risks as a society and as a country.
Okay, thanks. I want to shift a little bit and Jigar and Rob, I think it impacts you as well. A lot of what one hears from entrepreneurs and businesses who want to do infrastructure or other big projects is that the permitting regime is just too painful to get through and takes too long and everything else. And Jigar, I want to know sort of how you look at that. And there's sure plenty that you can do within your office to help to move things along and provide the capital for projects. But if we don't solve some of the permitting issues that we have as a country, then it makes it harder and harder to get projects done in a timely manner. And so I'm just wondering, Jigar, and I've seen some proposals about, well, if someone goes through the LPO process, maybe some of the NEPA processes or others should be shortchanged. I mean, or not shortchanged, but just shortened. How do you look at sort of other issues like permitting? Is there anything that you can do from where you sit to help make that more efficient?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I think it also relies on trust, right? And so we have an extraordinary environmental group here at the Loan Programs Office, and their track record is to get people through that NEPA process in half the time of most people's typical experiences within government. And part of the reason for that is that we write all of our own papers. So we don't hire external consultants to write those papers for NEPA. We write them ourselves. And so instead of being 250 pages, they end up being 43 pages. Because you can actually say in 43 pages what someone wants to get paid by the word says in 250 pages. And so I think that we are showing by example that you can actually shorten the time frame on these NEPA analyses if you have professionals who are committed to not only getting the process right. We do want to check to see if there's adverse impacts on the environment, endangered species, tribes, et cetera, but also that we treat the companies fairly in the process, and we're not weaponizing the permit process or any of these other processes. And so I think that people really look to the Loan Programs Office, and one of the reasons why people use the Loan Programs Office is they get access to our environmental group who can shorten the times on all these things, and they've earned the trust of their peers across government who trust that what we're doing is actually fair and complete and comprehensive, but efficient. And I think as we do a lot more work, I think you're going to see a lot of the other colleagues that we have throughout government say, gosh, what are they doing right over there? Let's figure out how to copy that, because we want to get these critical minerals projects through, Department of Interior. We want to get these offshore wind projects through BOEM, We want to get all these other things done. And so look, I think that there's a lot of folks who believe that these processes are irrevocably broken, but I think what we're showing at the LPO is that they're not, and you can actually do things efficiently. You can protect the American landscape, conservation, tribes and others, but also do things in an efficient fashion.
Robin?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because I think often entrepreneurs are not good at this. And then when they realize they're not good and they haven't built a company that can actually get billion-dollar scale projects built, they just blame, oh, the government isn't letting us get our permits. And it's like, are you sure that's the case? Or is it that you didn't do the work over the course of years to actually earn the ability to get those permits? And so in the case of Monolith, we're building this project in rural Nebraska, and it wouldn't matter if President Trump or President Biden or any person said, go build that project, because guess who issues the air permit? It's not the federal government, it's the Lancaster County. And guess who issues the water permit? It's a 21-person elected natural resource district. And guess who issues the special use permit? It's the village of Hallam, population 50, and city council of 5. And so we still have in this country this local institutions that you can't just build anywhere. You have to be invited into these communities, and you have to, over the course of years, prove and build your trust that you're going to be a responsible member of that community if you want to, build a plant and use groundwater, or impact the view shed because you now have an asset there. And so I think it's an important point for this next generation of entrepreneurs is that it's not enough just to do the technology and the product market fit. Like if you want to actually have an impact in climate and be able to get permits to get billion-dollar scale loans from someone like the LPO, you've got to do all that hard work over the course of years and build a team that can achieve it.
Okay, thanks. We're running up against our hour here. We could go all day, but I just want to wrap things up here and invite each of you to give some final comments. Jigar, just and you can take it anywhere you want, but I'd be interested in your take on kind of the bipartisan or partisan nature of what you've seen with the loan program and congressional support for it. Any thoughts you have on that? And also we began discussing it a little bit, but with the Russia-Ukraine issue, sort of what that says or lessons learned for the loan program and for what we're doing as a country going forward. So Jigar, why don't we start with you, and then Rob we'll finish up with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for this opportunity to talk to your members. Look, I think that I don't know that I have a lot more to say about Russia, Ukraine. I mean, certainly it highlights energy security as a big issue, and the Loan Programs Office role in helping entrepreneurs who are working to solve that problem. But I think that on the bipartisan nature of this, I mean, I've been working in infrastructure my whole career, right? And so infrastructure by definition is nonpartisan. Right? People want clean drinking water. They want roads that actually, can get them from place A to place B. They want bridges that don't collapse. They want carbon black, right? Even if you're switching to electric vehicles, you still want tires on that electric vehicle. And so they want all of these things that are important, and they want to be treated fairly in the way that we do this. And so I get phone calls from congressmen and senators from both the right and the left who are representing companies in their community who want to maintain their competitive leadership in these times. And for a lot of these industrial companies, for instance, figuring out their carbon footprint matters, right? I mean, the Europeans might be putting border adjustment taxes on soon for carbon dioxide. And so a lot of steel and cement companies who are mostly steel companies, I guess, but, who are exporting to those markets are worried about, those border adjustment taxes, and they want to make sure their carbon footprint's lower. And so when you think about the pace of business today, even our big oil companies are finding that the embedded carbon in their oil actually matters to some of the importing countries around whether they're going to import our oil or not, right? Or our LNG, right? You see Cheniere is like, really touting their low methane leakage on their LNG. So, these are market-based forces, and our loan money is available to help people make that transition. And so I am honored to be able to play that role and to not make this a partisan office, but really to make this an office that serves change makers, innovators, and entrepreneurs.
Okay. Thanks, Jigar. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, on the bipartisan side, we have offices in red states and blue states, and we have we're on every part of the political spectrum in terms of our employees. And I mean, I think our vision isn't political. Our vision is America has an incredible energy resource. Like, we won the lottery as a country when you think of what we have, obviously, in, gas but also in wind and solar and in nuclear and the infrastructure. Like Mont Belvieu is a national treasure. There's just so much here. And I think our vision is, can you match that up with American ingenuity, entrepreneurship, and the right support from government so that we can just be a juggernaut globally at not only the security side, but also the climate side, so that 20, 30, 50 years from now, we're in the same position that we have been in the past, which is independent and also a key exporter to countries that haven't been graced with such abundant resources. And And so, yeah, so thanks for having us. I really appreciate your audience. And Jigar, again, thank you for the partnership and hopefully a great few years of getting this plant built.
Oh, absolutely. And one last thing, Jeff, that I would say here is that, Rob's from Canada, right? And so, like, I mean, we want to create an ecosystem here where the best and brightest of the whole world come here to scale up these technologies here, right? And create jobs here. And we thank Rob for his leadership, but also, his choosing America to be the place where he, flourishes in his career and his innovation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great honor. 6 months ago, my wife and I were in Omaha, and we took the oath, became citizens. So it's exciting, and hopefully we're not the last folks from other parts of the world to come here and build companies.
All right, well, that's a good way to end it. Not sure I can add anything to that. So I will thank both of you for participating and all of the viewers that we have. And we look forward to staying in touch and doing more work on this issue. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.